Okay, great. I'm going to talk about resilience today. And, and I did say during coronavirus because, and I was thinking about this absolutely applies to graduate students and to people in general, but we're also dealing with coronavirus. And so I guess some of my comments are going to be to think about how do we come through this difficult time, focusing on resilience. And we have more difficulties with what's going on with COVID right now than we do under most circumstances, and it basically adds to our stress. It has an impact on our daily lives. There's no end date. And what happens when there's a complete load of stressors going on in our life is that it can actually make it much harder for us to cope with anything that comes along. And then with coronavirus, obviously, it blocks our access to protective factors. Going to gyms is an example. That may be something you could do, getting together with friends. The fear about what's happening, and then the impact if you have it as well. And so we know basically that what's going on now and what's been happening in the last 6 months is having a major effect on mental health. In China during the coronavirus, these rates are much, much higher than what you'd ever expect to see. Usually in the population in the US, we have about 20% at most of people have depression. And so when you look at the US, this was published maybe about 2 months ago, you see that we have a much higher indication of stress, anxiety, trauma, and having some type of emotional or mental health impact from it. So I really want to emphasize this because it makes it harder coping with everything, and your usual defenses are not there. And then this applies to graduate school as well as the coronavirus, but our brains are basically anticipatory machines. It functions for our best interests, that we anticipate what could happen in the future so that we can problem solve what to do. And we're hardwired to anticipate what happens. It braces us for having a plan. But then when does it go wrong, and when does it become a problem for us? And so we have the added uncertainty about what's going on right now, as well as a lack of controllability. Everything keeps getting disruptive. Should I fly to see somebody? Can I see family? Can I not? And we don't know what we have control over. I think it's probably a little bit better than it was before at the beginning, when you didn't even know if you touched a surface, if that was going to have an impact on you. And so again, my theme today is resilience and what I want to talk about. And when we look at what happened to people that were living in New York when 9/11 happened, the people who did best were people who found meanings in what happened, and try to think about something meaningful that came from it, and acknowledge the emotional weight of the attack. So they were not people who pushed it aside and said, I'm not, this is not a problem, and I will just keep doing what I'm doing. They're people that actually acknowledge their feelings about it. They had more of a sense of control. The other one that I've highlighted here is they practiced restraint from rumination and self-recrimination. So rumination is basically excessive worry, where you worry so much about something that you cannot stop worrying about it. And it has very big impact on you because you're constantly thinking about it. And so stress responses during graduate school or during COVID is normal, but especially when something major like this happens. And so what I really want to think about is resilience, and how do you come to a place of resilience in anything that's difficult with you, that you face. And it's actually the norm that a lot of people, 2/3 of people, are resilient when they're faced with moderate adversity. So this is lower than the greater the stress. So, but it's good to know that people can face really difficult times and come through it feeling like they have gained a deeper understanding of themselves and know how to cope with things in the future better. With SARS, about half of the people remain resilient. So whenever and I do not know what the statistics are for how resilient students come through graduate school, but it's very, very much a test of your psychological fortitude to get through graduate school. But people obviously do come through it feeling resilient. And so the reason I wanted to emphasize resilience today is because I think that I could sit here and say, well, here are things you could do to cope and do self-care and take care of yourself, such as exercising, eating really well. But really what's important is to think about how your thought processes and your mind can actually help you when you're faced with something difficult. And what influences this is individual differences. So you may have more of a sense of being an optimistic person. You may have more social support. You might have more family that can help you through it. And you might have better financial resources. But you also may have a really strong sense of community. And what do I mean by resilience? It's basically, when I asked people this at a recent seminar, they said it's bouncing back. And I really think that captures it best. So when you're faced with something difficult, how do you bounce back instead of letting it feel like it's making you sink like a weight going down? So resilience is really the ability to adapt in the face of difficult things that are happening and significant stress. And when you have a mindset that helps you to look at things that you can, so that you can bounce back, then your reaction to very difficult stressors really works better. And so it helps you find a sense of meaning in your life. And I really want to emphasize that resilience can be learned and it can be improved. So sometimes we think, oh, this person is resilient and this person is not resilient. But in truth, it's really something that it can be a characteristic you already had, but it can be a process that you learn to do better. And then afterwards, it can be something you look at and think, oh, this is an outcome. I'm really resilient. And then that can help you in the future when you face difficult times again. And so, you know, there's different ways of looking at resilience. It can be like, again, what I said, something that exists in you. It can also be because you're really able to get social support from people. And it can be what you do to cope, like I said, like maybe going to the gym and doing things and trying to be flexible in how you do it. But I really want to emphasize the personal beliefs that sense of meaning and purpose and balance really has for you. And so what I'd really encourage you to do when you're facing difficult times is try to stop and think about how can you find meaning in this situation and move forward. And I'm not talking about this toxic positivity that we see a lot of in the media, which is, you know, it's going to be great, it's all going to be fine. But what I'm talking about is how can you really think about the situation and try to look internally for your, you know, psychologically, what it's something you're gaining from the situation, spiritually, culturally, how you're connecting with people, what you're learning about yourself. So it's really important to take a step back and reflect on what's important to you right now when you're trying to develop resiliency, when you're faced with any kind of stress. And then you can incorporate that into who you are and move forward. And it's really important that you believe in yourself, that you can do it. Again, resilience is not something that I'm born with more of or less of. And in some research, we've actually found that people who are more resilient have actually faced way more hardship. And something that is a talk I've given in and of itself is that resiliency is actually associated with creativity. So your ability to be resilient and to try to challenge yourself to be resilient means that you're applying creatively how you think about a situation so that you can get through it and change your mindset. And there is really research that shows that people who faced really, really bad hardships, such as war, actually are more creative when given problems in the future. I'm just trying to keep track of my time here, so I'm glancing down. So if you think about COVID as an example, think about what's important to you, what makes you feel good even when you can't control the situation. What do you want other people to say about you, and how do you want to be responded to at this time? So you're basically creating your own narrative, your own story about how you want this situation to be in your life. How do you want to remember what you did or didn't do? And what do you want to be known for? Do you want to be known for the person who gets really angry all the time and frustrated, or the person who really tries to dig in and tries to make the best of the situation? And so what we're really talking about is how do you try to increase your cognitive and emotional flexibility? And this absolutely applies to graduate school, because if you're flexible, then you don't just have one way of doing it. And it's crucial in order for you to maintain your resilience, that you're able to think about what you can do and modify when something isn't working for you. It's also really important to realize that resilience doesn't mean you're perfect at it all the time. You will have bad days when you're not resilient, when you lose your temper, when you're frustrated, when you're not very kind to yourself or to others. But that you can keep moving it forward and trying to be more resilient. So you can, in the short term and the long term, have an impact on your body and your life with how you deal with stress. And one of the things I want to emphasize just before we stop here is that growth values is maybe a term you haven't thought of before, but it's basically, I'm asking you and challenging you in order to cope with everything that's going on, to try to adopt a value of growth, that you really value seeing yourself as someone who cares about others, who takes care of themselves, who finds meaning in situations, is open to change, and really wants to be the best that they can be. Because that way you will then be more open to trying to adopt a resilient mindset. So why are values important? And there's a book that was written, it's a little bit more academic. Dr. Heidi Wayman has not done this book for the lay public, but given that level of education we have in this room right now, I think that you would get a lot from looking at it. But she's done work with something that she identified as the quiet ego, which really overlaps with the whole idea of growth values and resilience. And what she's found is that people who adapt more of this quiet ego perspective are doing better physically, are doing better emotionally, respond better to stress. They have healthier, happier social relationships. And there are 4 components of this. And this is, again, just to break down and give you an idea of resilience. And if any of you would like me to give you more links to some of this information, I'm really happy to. But, and I've done research with Dr. Wayman as well, where we've incorporated the quiet ego. And just having people spend 4 minutes thinking about this led to quicker recovery to stress, and led to better coping biologically and psychologically. So awareness, which is kind of the mindfulness that you hear a lot in the media, but it's a little bit broader than that, and it's a detached awareness where you try to look at situations without judgment of yourself and others and try to be in the present. So not just being in the present, but if you're in the present, you can be more open-minded and less judgmental of yourself or of other people. Belonging means that you really remember that you're connected to all beings, whether it's the natural world, animals, and to people around you, and try to get perspective by thinking about what it means to be human and what you share with everybody. So, you know, whether if somebody loses their temper with you in a public situation right now, instead of letting yourself go with the anger and stay what I called ruminating earlier on, you really try to think about, okay, we're all people, we're all doing the best we can. How can we just move on and handle this? Compassion is another component of the quiet ego that has to do with perspective taking. We could call that empathy as well. Cultivating that and finding that as a value in yourself. Again, this is all related to these growth values, being open-hearted, giving to others. And then lastly, which is probably something I've emphasized the most today, is growth. That growth is a value of yours, to learn from your mistakes, to become a better person, and to try to find meaning in the situation. I'm not going to have time to go through this, which I wish I had time to let you listen to the quiet ego, but we don't have enough time. But basically, when you're stressed and dissatisfied, it's very hard to get perspective and it's more difficult. And so it's really important to try to remember these types of ideas so that you can be at your best and you can also try to be as resilient as possible. And that was what I wanted to bring up.